He's on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. What does he make of it? Investigators looking into the cause of a Chinese passenger jet crash. It hit a mountain in March this year, killing 132 people on board, have found the plane was deliberately crashed by the pilot or an intruder. Retired air accident investigator Steve Moss will have his say. And the debate this hour, I'm asking, is religious education important in our schools? A new study has found that many academy schools don't offer RE lessons, with the Father of the House of Commons stating the decision leaves a gaping hole in the school curriculum. And with me for the next 2 hours, delighted to say, we've got the media personality and writer Christine Hamilton, who's complaining, like me, about just how hot it is today in the studio. First, we've got the news headlines for you.
Good afternoon, it's 4:01. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Labour has repeated its call for a windfall tax on energy companies to help with the rising cost of living on the day the inflation rate hit a 40-year high. The Consumer Price Index hit 9% in the 12 months to April, up from 7% in March. Speaking at Prime Minister's questions, Boris Johnson promised to look at all measures available to help struggling families. But Sir Keir Starmer accused the government of inaction.
Whilst he dithers, British households are slapped with an extra £53 million on their energy bills every single day. Meanwhile, every single day, North Sea oil and gas giants rake in £32 million in unexpected profit.
We're already spending £22 billion. We're already helping people with the cost of living in any way that we can, Mr. Speaker. But the reason we can do that is because we took the tough decisions to get this country through COVID, to make sure that we came out of lockdown in the way that was necessary, and to have a strong economy.
Meanwhile, official figures show food prices are also going up across the UK, with those rising steepest, including meat, oils and fresh milk. According to Retail Price Index figures, overall food prices rose by nearly 7%, with lamb and poultry up by 14% and 10% respectively. Some food producers, like Premier Foods, who own brands including Mr Kipling and Oxo, have warned that their already increased prices will have to go up further. Boris Johnson says he was shocked to learn that a Conservative MP had been arrested, having been accused of rape and sexual assault offences. The accused politician, who can't be named for legal reasons, has been released on bail pending further investigations and has been asked by the Chief Whip to stay away from Parliament. But the Labour Party has called for the politician to have the whip removed. The Foreign Secretary says it would be very positive if the UK and EU could negotiate a solution to the Northern Ireland Protocol, but that there must not be a delay. Liz Truss has set out plans to rewrite Britain's post-Brexit trading agreement, changing the rules on how goods enter Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. The Democratic Unionist Party is currently refusing to join the executive instalment until a solution is found. An NHS trust has been fined more than £1.3 million after failing to provide safe care to a pensioner and a dialysis patient. A senior district judge said that families of the deceased had suffered unimaginable grief after the patients died whilst at the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital in 2019 and 2020. The judge said the offences were aggravated by a previous fine and a poor management, health and safety record. A 13-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of sharing Islamist terrorist material online. The teenager was detained in West London yesterday, but he's since been released on bail until mid-June. Investigators say it's very rare for teenagers to be arrested for a terrorism offence, but that recently there's been a slight increase. More than 260 small boats have crossed the English Channel into the UK waters so far this year, GB News can confirm. 7 small boats were spotted on the English side of the Channel yesterday, and 285 people were transferred onto border force and rescue vessels. It's more than double the number who crossed at this time last year. Spanish police have arrested 5 Eintracht Frankfurt fans following clashes in Seville city centre ahead of the Europa League final against Scotland's Rangers. Footage shows the men wearing balaclavas and throwing flares in the direction of outdoor bars where Rangers fans were gathered. Spanish authorities have deployed thousands of officers to police the game across the city. Kick-off is 7 o'clock tonight. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Colin.
Lots going on this afternoon. Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, talking about big changes to Britain's foreign aid, all the money you pay as taxpayers, around about £12 billion, isn't it, every year goes towards foreign aid. There are some modifications to that scheme. Liz Truss talking in the Commons now. We'll bring that to you. And we're also going to be reflecting on, well, this story. I think we can show you some live pictures. The royal visit, Prince Charles and Camilla, Queen Consort, as will be. It's his 19th trip to Canada. A moment's silence there. The Prince of Wales. It's a 3-day whistle-stop tour, paying their respects at a war memorial in Ottawa. Canada, as some of you will know, I'm sure, has been the country quickest to join Britain in times of war, most notably in World War I, when tens of thousands of Canadian troops flocked to the colours and fought alongside British regiments in the trenches of World War I. Prince Charles and Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, there in Ottawa. We'll be talking to Cameron Walker, who's our royal reporter, travelling family on that trip with Charles and Camilla in a short while. In the meantime, we're going to reflect on this story for you. A Conservative MP has been released on bail after being arrested in connection with alleged rape and sexual assault offences dating back more than 15 years. The Metropolitan Police confirming the suspect is a man, and the Chief Whip of the Conservative Party has asked him not to attend Parliament while the investigation's ongoing. The Speaker has urged MPs not to identify him publicly. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, to reflect on this is with me here. Darren, and Christine Hamilton as well, who's going to be pitching in through the course of the next 2 hours, though. On this story, you've got to say what, Darren?
Well, these are clearly very, very serious allegations, Colin. Just going through what we do know from the Met is that this man was arrested on suspicion of indecent assault, sexual assault, rape, abuse of position of trust and misconduct in public office. Now, we believe this relates back to actually historical allegations from 2002 through to 2009, so over a 7-year period. As you said, there are reporting restrictions, of course, on who we can't effectively say who it is. And these are pretty serious. Now, at the moment, the Conservative Party have effectively said to this MP, stay away, don't come to the parliamentary estates until this police investigation is concluded. Now, the police have been investigating this for 2 years. A decision will have to be made about whether to charge this MP or not. But frankly, it is a reminder, I think, of the problems at Westminster. And this is not an isolated case. I mean, far from it. We've had a whole series of allegations against MPs over the last 2 or 3 months alone. I think there's 3 or 4 Conservative MPs who've already lost the whip on various different allegations already this year. And it's not just confined to the Conservative Party. You know, there have been Labour MPs who've also had the whip withdrawn since the 2019 election. And it's raising lots of questions, Colin, about what happens in that place in Parliament.
Darren, I know there are legal restrictions on what we can and can't say, so there we have to leave it, but appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Can I just add something on
No. On this one?
OK. No, nothing, not about this particular case.
Yeah, go on.
No, this is a wider issue. I want to, I mean, obviously I'm not going to... On the wider issue, you said he has not yet been charged, so he is, at the moment, innocent until proven guilty. So obviously he's not going to be named. But I'm a member of something called FAIR, which is FAIR, Falsely Accused Individuals for Reform, because people with long memories may remember that my husband and I were arrested and falsely accused of rape way back in 2001. Our names were all over the place because the police chose to tell the media that we were inside the police station. And I think it is grotesquely wrong, and it hasn't happened in this case. Nobody should have their names out there if they're just accused, at least until they've been charged. And then I think a judge should make the decision as to whether their names should be released.
And it's interesting, the Speaker, we'll say no more on this, but it's interesting the Speaker has appealed to MPs to say, actually, you've got parliamentary privilege. Of course you could name an individual if you want to. I'd rather you didn't. Christine, we're going to leave it there.
It would be grotesque if any of them did.
We're definitely going to move on. So the British taxpayer is to stop sending the £13 million it gives to China every year for research and innovation. It's part of a wider effort to steer the UK's aid budget away from what the government calls malign actors. There's also been questions of whether the UK should really be giving so much aid to countries which don't share our values or behave in a way which runs counter to the UK's interests. You'll know, by the way, we've cut our foreign aid recently, haven't we, from 0.7% of GDP to 0.5%, but it's still around about £12 billion a year. That makes us the third biggest donor globally after America and Germany. Well, answering questions to the International Development Committee, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss explained why the government had made this decision.
What we recognise is there is increasing activity by authoritarian states, particularly in terms of investment in countries, trade with countries, and economic coercion, as well as security interference as well. So our development strategy is about creating a strong alternative offer that is honest and reliable and that helps those countries develop in the direction that is going to lead to a sustainable future rather than in a direction of unsustainable debt and increasingly authoritarian policies which would lead to huge problems in the population. And we can see the adverse effects, for example, of the Wagner Group's activities in certain African countries, of the heavy levels of indebtedness some countries have to China, to see what are the perils of going down that route.
What's the route she's talking about? Let's pick up that point with the Conservative MP for Crawley and a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Henry Smith. Henry Smith, welcome to you. The Foreign Secretary there was making the point that in the minds of some people, I imagine quite a few people at the Foreign Office, it does seem to them and others that the Chinese government uses this Belt and Road initiative as a way of putting client states, developing countries, on the hook. They become indebted, they borrowed too much, and then they're in hock to the Chinese, not just economically, but politically too.
Well, good afternoon. That's absolutely right. What the People's Republic of China is embarking on and has been for the best part of a decade is a sort of neo-colonial policy where they are seeking to get dependence of typically developing countries, but not exclusively, some in Europe as well, on them financially and for support for infrastructure projects, public services and the like. And then they are in China's sphere of influence. So this is a deliberate policy of Beijing to try and I would argue, spread its malign influence around the globe. And it's right that Britain does what it can, particularly in conjunction with other democratic allies, to check that. We don't have much more time to do that.
Yeah. The other element of the reforms announced today concerns where the money goes. And at the moment of that budget I mentioned, 3 or 4 billion of it goes to big multinational organisations, the UN, the World Bank. And we're moving away from that, it seems. We're going to do more of what we're seeing at the moment, for instance, on the borders of Ukraine, where we have a bilateral aid relationship with, say, Poland. Poland, here's some money, help with the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. And we're cutting out the middleman. No UN involvement, no EU involvement, no World Bank, directly bilateral.
Well, that's a positive trend. Certainly when we were members of the European Union, we'd send vast sums of money to Brussels that would then rebrand it as European money and redistribute it around Europe. And everyone would say, how wonderful, the EU's largesse. And essentially that's happening with international aid funding through the UN, the World Bank, the World Health Organization. I think that's another one we need to discuss the future of. And it's British taxpayers' money that there's then branded as these international institutions supplying support for people, and we lose control of exactly how that money is spent, and it means that some very nefarious regimes around the world could potentially be using British taxpayers' money against the British interests. So it's absolutely right that first of all the government reduced the international aid budget, and now it is right that we are more directly funding projects that are in the British national interest, whether in terms of security and trade.
Henry Smith, what do you say to those people, including some on your own backbenches, who say, oh, this is a nice conversation you're having about the UN and multinationalism, but actually 12 billion quid right now, that is equivalent. You could cancel the rise to national insurance. I'm about to talk to a guest about inflation, just hit a 40-year high. We all know that, and we're talking about it all the time, the cost of living crisis. In one stroke, you could vastly improve the circumstances of millions of British families by having a moratorium on foreign aid.
Well, I have some sympathy with that, and I think that the government should be looking at further reducing the foreign aid budget. As you said in your introduction, it's gone down from 0.7% to 0.5%, but as well as directing it and focusing it more to support countries that are a security and a trade interest for us. I do think we need to look at the totality of the budget as well. When it was 0.7%, and at the time I was on the International Development Select Committee in Parliament, which scrutinised the government spending in this area, as you got towards the end of the financial year, they were shoveling the money out of the door just to spend it. That is no way to conduct the public finances or foreign policy of this country.
Totally agree.
And therefore, we need
Henry Smith,
really get more.
We've got to leave it there, but we appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. Henry Smith is on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Christine Hamilton's here in the studio with me, with, I imagine, some views on this foreign aid.
Well, everybody's got their own horror stories about where some of this money is spent. Nobody, I don't think, would dispute humanitarian aid, helping the world's poorest, especially when there's been some particular disaster. Nobody would dispute that. And in fact, the British are amongst the most generous voluntarily in the whole world. We give billions to charities, not necessarily foreign charities, but we do give billions to charity every year. So we're a very generous-hearted country. But, I mean, I've just turned up a few examples. For example, we have spent more than £700,000 to give friendship benches in Zimbabwe.
Well, they're very handy.
Friendship benches to encourage people to sit down and discuss their mental health. We've also apparently spent £1 million to raise awareness of the health benefits of darker rice in Asia. Now, should we really be doing that? I mean, they produce the stuff, for goodness sake. We've spent £80,000, OK, that's not a lot of money, on encouraging greener hammams, Turkish baths, in Morocco. Now, apparently they need to be accelerated in their ecological transition process. I mean, it is absolute rubbish. And I remember way back in, well, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, we put a whole shed load of money into St Helens, that remote island, to put an airport.
Not St Helens, which is in the northwest, but St Helena.
St Helena, sorry, did I say St Helena? No, not Liverpool.
We'll
no,
be getting emails.
Shed load of money in them. We hadn't done proper testing, but they apparently put a single prop plane up to test the wind, and instead they wanted to have Boeing XYZs taking off, and they can't. So all that money was completely wasted. There was no commercial benefit at all. So it's got to be targeted. I mean, Henry Smith mentioned control. We need control over where that money is spent.
I'm quite hawkish on this. I think there's a massive gap between what the chattering classes think should be done and what ordinary folk should be done. So, and I think that when you get a gap
this big...
just
about everything.
Well, no, but this one, I think when it's this big, it's very corrosive, because it's not public money. It's our money, that's been spent. But we're about to talk just after 5 o'clock to Lord Richard Dannat. You know, not a headbanger, man of the world, former head of the British Army. I've interviewed him several times. The last time we talked about foreign aid, he was absolutely adamant. It's got to stay. Soft power, he said. You can't, you've got to pay the price for that stuff. It stops wars. It stops people migrating in great numbers. It's a price worth paying, he says.
Well, I understand that argument, but I think the key word is control. Too much of that money, I suspect, and I think a lot of people suspect, goes into the pockets of goodness knows who in these countries. People are making a lot of money out of our overseas aid.
Well, including the people sometimes, actually, who are based here, drawing quite good salaries and driving those lovely white Land Cruisers. You know the ones, don't you?
I do.
OK, Christine, thanks very much. UK inflation has hit a 40-year high at 9%. The figures just released account for the 12 months to April this year and show the impact of higher energy bills in particular, hitting millions of households. Inflation is up from 7% in March, 7 to 9% in no time. It's not clear where the ceiling for rises is. Some analysts predicting it will rise irresistibly throughout the course of the rest of the year and stop who knows where. Sue Hayward is a personal finance and consumer expert. Sue, welcome to you. It's nice to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
This can always feel quite abstract. We're sitting here in the studio bandying numbers to and fro, but actually out there, people are really struggling. On the forecourts, I've just read in the last hour, the price of a litre of petrol has hit a record high. You know, when every time people fill up now, it's hurting.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that on top of the inflation, obviously we're hearing about the figures, 9% is a horrific amount. But of course, this is almost like a triple whammy. This is on top of the existing national insurance increases. We've had the income tax, personal allowances frozen. If you're reliant on the state pension, of course, you wave goodbye to the triple lock, which meant you got a much smaller increase in your state pension. So there's been a whole lot of cutbacks and ways in which our household budgets have been stripped down, as well as obviously the whammy now of inflation creeping up, but in fact in this case jumping up, a huge amount. So it's very much a case that for a lot of people, they may have stripped down their budgets as much as they can. They may have cut out all their memberships and subscriptions and all those kind of things, which are the obvious things to cut out if you're struggling. But you get to a point where you have cut out everything and you need to have your food and your energy, pay your rent or your mortgage and council tax. And where do you go then is the question, really.
So this is going to sound a bit like a sort of media navel-gazing question. It's just occurred to me. It is interesting that, personal finance experts like you obviously come on and dispense advice, worthwhile advice to people about how they can trim their budgets, etc. But when those words come from the mouth of a politician, a Conservative politician, people go doolally.
Well, this is it, and it's just really, really hard at the moment for a lot of people because all the usual money-saving tips that, you would suggest and things, people are either doing, they've done, or they're just not really going to touch the sides. I mean, one thing, to be honest, that I would like to see the government do in terms of a way that I think it will temporarily alleviate pressure on a lot of households is, back in the pandemic, they put pressure on the lenders to offer the mortgage payment holidays. That was obviously led by the coronavirus pandemic. But right now, while it isn't going to put money in people's pockets that they can keep, but I think it would, if they were to introduce this and ask the lenders to do this for 3 to 6 months, it would just alleviate that pressure that is building up on so many households. Yes, of course, they would have to remake or repay the money further down the line. Yes, of course, the interest will build up. We're not talking about free cash, but in terms of something that they could do, because I think a lot of people are very reticent to go to their lenders and say, look, can I have a mortgage payment holiday, which you could still do if you have a good track record with your payment. While you can't still get one under the coronavirus scheme, they may be able to give you a mortgage payment holiday or agree terms on a one-to-one or an individual basis. If this was kind of part of a national scheme, or the government said, look, let's reintroduce this, I think it would certainly help alleviate the financial pressure on a lot of households.
Sue Hayward, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Christine Hamilton's alongside me through the course of the next hour and a half or thereabouts. Times front page this morning, Christine. Well-informed speculation, I would suggest to you, indicating that come the autumn there will be an emergency budget and there will be tax cuts.
Well, I hope so. I would like to see tax cuts. We want to get back to a tax-cutting economy, an enterprise creation economy. I mean, what, for example, Margaret Thatcher would have thought at the performance of the Governor of the Bank of England yesterday, was it, or the day before?
Well, he would have had less power, wouldn't he? Because it wouldn't have been an independent Bank of England.
It wouldn't have been but, well, we handed over to the Bank of England, who are independent, so that there's no politicisation of things like interest rates, etc. What did we do with COVID? We handed it over to the experts, and look what happened. We followed them. I mean, it seems to me that the Governor's been asleep at the wheel. So, I mean, I think there probably will be a budget, yes.
Would you have a windfall tax?
Well, half of me says yes, of course, but then it would be a very dangerous precedent. I understand why people want a windfall tax. Of course, they see these oil and gas companies making a fortune. And when they don't make a fortune, nobody suggests they should be bailed out. But they are perhaps the most egregious example, but why just them? I mean, some grain farmers are going to make a lot of money because of they're not the only ones.
They will say, I do where I can to stick up for farmers. The farmers, of course, they've got huge increases in their input prices
that was just a stupid example, maybe. No, but they are not the only ones, and I think it would set a very dangerous precedent that it's a retrospective tax, and if we get a reputation worldwide for retrospective taxation, what company is going to want to come here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So short-term gain, but long-term jeopardy, I would have thought, for
Christine,
that one.
for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, we're going to be joined by a retired air accident investigator, Steve Moss. His reaction to the news that the Chinese passenger jet, you'll remember it from earlier this year, we covered it extensively, it hit a mountain. It was March this year. All 132 people on board died. We now think it was deliberately crashed by the pilot or somebody who got into the cockpit. Back in a moment.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
28 minutes past 4. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV and on radio. Now, investigations into the cause of a Chinese plane crash in March this year suggest the pilot or an intruder intentionally put the aircraft into a terminal nosedive. There's a warning to our viewers on TV that you may find the footage distressing. The Boeing 737-800, it was flying between the southern Chinese cities of Kunming and Guangzhou when it crashed. All 132 passengers and crew on board died. Investigators have so far not found any mechanical or technical faults with the jet. You remember at the time there was a lot of speculation about why this could have happened. It was flying in level flight, then just suddenly careered to the ground. Instead, according to the Wall Street Journal, it's quoted sources close to the US preliminary assessment, the plane did what it was told to do by someone in the cockpit. Data from the black box flight recorder, it was recovered from the crash site, suggested that inputs to the controls, as it was described, pushed the plane into a near vertical dive. We're joined by Steve Moss, a retired air accident investigator. Steve Moss, appreciate your time. We'll come on to what the Wall Street Journal's reporting in a second, but when this happened in March, what was your first inkling?
Yes. I was I would have liked to have confirmed as a matter of priority that there hadn't been a mid-air breakup. To mean that the rate of descent was so steep that it would have to be something absolutely catastrophic to do it. I did consider the possibility of some sort of malign intervention, but so I said at the time that I would like to the investigation team to concentrating that all the aeroplane was there on the main accident site and that a part of it hadn't come off. Now, that would be extremely rare on an aeroplane this new, but it's something that you have to consider.
Yeah, this is the deadliest loss of life in China for 28 years. It's clearly a huge domestic tragedy. But we know this is a regime, a communist regime in China, which likes to keep facts to itself. We think back to COVID. But because the black box had to be sent to Boeing so they could retrieve and analyse the data, admittedly it's through a journalistic channel, this seems to have come out through the Wall Street Journal, but there's no way it would appear that the Chinese can keep these findings secret.
Yes, I can see the problem. Certainly Boeing and the National Transportation Safety Board will have all the other customers of this type of aircraft banging on their door saying, what have you found? How is there something that might affect our aircraft? Is there something else? And so there would be enormous pressure to at least allay fears. Now, Boeing and the NTSB are not going to say anything officially without the sanction of the Chinese authorities, who are the aging authority in this case. And so it looks as though somebody has sort of leaked that information.
Well, it does happen, doesn't it? Steve Moss, we're going to leave it there. Steve Moss is a retired air accident investigator. Not a brilliant line, apologise for that. Christine Hamilton's alongside me. Sad to say, Christine, it's happened before that somebody, a pilot, in the case of the German Wings aircraft that ploughed into a mountainside. Very, very rare, as, of course, are air accidents, but it's happened before.
It is very rare. Pilots have strokes and things, but that's why you have a co-pilot. The important thing, we were talking about it in the break, the important thing to me is that it's the Americans who've got that black box. So we will, in as far as you can, we will get to the truth of it. The Chinese, the Civil Aviation Administrator of China said earlier on that reports that the plane may have been crashed deliberately had gravely misled the public. They didn't say, we don't know. They just said, this has gravely misled the public. But that has been taken out of their control now, so we may possibly get to the truth. But it's terrifying.
Well, it's terrifying, even for lay people, Christine. And we're not going to replay the pictures again. And obviously, if you're listening on radio, you've got no sight of them. But it was distinctive. It was unusual to see this jet arrowing to Earth in an almost vertical position. It looked very unnatural. It's not a plane that had broken up in midair, obviously. No. So it sort of does seem to fit the narrative. What
the Chinese have said, that as far as they're aware, neither of the pilots had financial worries or health problems or nothing like that. So, maybe an intruder, maybe a terror, who knows?
OK, Christine, for now, thanks very much. Coming up, I'll give my take on the changes to the UK government and what they're doing about foreign aid. Today's Brazier Angle, coming up next.
Good afternoon, it's 4:34. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Labour has repeated its call for a windfall tax on energy companies to help with the rising cost of living on the day the inflation rate hit a 40-year high. The Consumer Price Index hit 9% in the 12 months to April. Speaking at Prime Minister's questions, Boris Johnson promised to look at all measures available to help struggling families. But Sir Keir Starmer accused the government of inaction. Boris Johnson says he was shocked to learn that a Conservative MP had been arrested, having been accused of rape and sexual assault offences. The politician, who can't be named for legal reasons, has been released on bail pending further investigations and has asked to stay away from Parliament. The Labour Party says he should have the whip removed. The Home Secretary says work is taking place right now to send migrants to Rwanda after more than 900 crossed the Channel in 4 days. GB News can confirm more than 260 small boats have arrived so far this year. 7 were spotted on the English side of the Channel yesterday, and 285 people were transferred onto border force and rescue vessels. Spanish police have arrested 5 Eintracht Frankfurt fans following clashes in Seville city centre ahead of the Europa League final against Scotland's Rangers. Footage shows the men wearing balaclavas and throwing flares in the direction of outdoor bars where Rangers fans were gathered. Spanish authorities have deployed thousands of officers to police the game across the city. Kick-off is 7 o'clock tonight. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. In just a moment, it's back to Colin.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, I'm happy you're sticking with Colin Brazier on TV, online and on digital radio. These are our top stories at just after 4:30 this afternoon. Boris Johnson says he'll look at all measures needed to help people struggling with rising bills. The UK's rate of inflation has reached a 40-year high, 9%. At PMQs, the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, called for a one-off tax on oil and gas profits, arguing it would raise billions to help ease energy bills. The Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, says the Conservative MP accused of rape has agreed to stay away from Westminster. Last night, the Met Police said the man, aged in his 50s, had been held on suspicion of indecent assault, sexual assault, rape, abuse of position of trust and misconduct in public office. He's now been released on bail. And tens of thousands of Glasgow Rangers fans are in Seville ahead of one of the biggest matches in the club's history. Rangers take on German side Eintracht Frankfurt in the Europa League final this evening. The temperature's 33 degrees today. Kick-off 7 o'clock. Civil servants who worked for Britain's foreign aid programme were onto a nice earner. Their pay was the most generous in our public sector, typically £51,000 a year, a figure £8,000 higher than the average. Why such generosity? Simple. The old Department for International Development, set up 25 years ago this month, in one of the first acts of the Tony Blair government, was awash with cash. Your cash. Especially after another Blairite, the Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron, made it illegal for this country not to spend billions of pounds every year on foreign aid. That's right, in 2015, the target of 0.7% of national income to go on donations became legally binding. That's the equivalent of about £16 billion today. Well, you can guess what happened. It happens in every big organisation where people feel they have to spend up to a certain amount. They worry that if they don't, someone else will realise that not quite that much cash was needed after all. So they spend like it's going out of fashion, which is fine if it's their money, not so fine if it's taxpayers' cash. Well, over the years, we heard the stories: girl bans in Ethiopia, a space programme in India, UK-funded campaigns to reduce salt consumption among children in China. In Pakistan, locals in Peshawar were given cash point cards to withdraw free cash. Your cash. Over the years, there were complaints, not least from leaders in the developing world, who maintained that, far from helping, foreign aid made things worse. It embedded corruption and stunted trade. Ghana's president, Nana Akufo-Addo, recently said foreign aid had turned Africans into beggars, and it had to stop. He told his people that it was time to, quote, discard a mindset of dependency and living on handouts. Well, something is now finally changing. Other Western governments realise that writing an aid target into law might swell the hearts of the sanctimonious, but it's ultimately counterproductive. The Dutch, for instance, recently ditched theirs. And today, Britain took its latest step in the slow unwinding of its misguided foreign aid programme. It's been coming for a while. The Department for International Development was dissolved in 2020 and its functions taken over by the Foreign Office. Then Rishi Sunak announced there'd be a temporary reduction to the aid budget. That 0.7% figure, it's fallen to 0.5%, but that's still £12 billion. Britain still remains the third biggest donor of foreign aid in the world after the US and Germany. And that £12 billion, it's still going to regimes who have an excellent track record of wasting it. Worse still, we are still handing over hundreds of millions of pounds to countries who trouser the cash and then cosy up to our enemies. Take the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan. These pictures, apologies if you're listening on radio, these pictures just from a couple of months ago. We give £250 million of British taxpayers' money to Islamabad. It didn't stop Khan siding with Vladimir Putin just after the invasion of Ukraine. Well, there are some red wall Tories who think the foreign aid budget is immoral and corrosive, that it's wrong to send money abroad when there are food banks at home. They point to our £12 billion aid budget, smaller than it was, but still enough to cancel out the recent rise in national insurance. The government seems to be inching towards their position, albeit slowly. What Liz Truss announced in the Commons today might sound bureaucratic and technical, but it's actually highly significant. We're cutting out the middleman. Less money for the UN and World Bank. These multinational bodies really do know how to spend your cash. David Miliband, for instance, who runs the International Rescue Committee in New York, earns $1 million a year. We will now give money directly to countries we think deserve it. An example of this is Poland, with whom we've struck a bilateral deal to fund humanitarian efforts in Ukraine. I've no idea whether Liz Truss knows her Dickens, but she'd do well to study the character of Mrs. Jellaby in Bleak House, who famously is so keen to help the poor of Africa that she neglects her own children. As Britain faces an acute cost of living crisis, foreign aid can no longer be ring-fenced. An army of NGOs, of charities, of politicians, of academics will circle the wagons whenever a cut is even suggested. Listen to Theresa May on the subject. But these aren't the people who are struggling most right now. If the Tories want to help the poor, charity has to start at home. Christine Hamilton is my studio guest today. Christine, your thoughts?
Well, indeed. I mean, it's almost immoral to me that we give foreign aid to people like China or India. They have their own space programme, for heaven's sake. I mean, it's utterly absurd.
But what about poorer countries who are really struggling, for instance, to feed their own people?
Yeah, no, I think it would be mean-spirited to cut all overseas aid. I fully understand the arguments, and if you've got, if you're queuing up at a food bank, I completely understand that. I think it's in our nature to be generous. So, I mean, don't forget, some of the aid that we give is in terms of military aid and peacekeeping forces and things like that, which doesn't come in the budget, but it perhaps ought to be counted. But I think we've really got to cut it back, and we've got to target it where it's really needed. And, as you say, cut out all the middlemen. Control is the key word. And I'm not in favour of just cancelling it altogether. I think I would feel mean if we did that. Although, as I said earlier, the British are amongst the most generous in the world for giving voluntarily to charities.
And by the way, we don't include all the reparations that get sent back by a lot of UK nationals who have family abroad and they work in the UK. That's never included in this calculation. Just on one brief parliamentary point of principle, this idea that you write something into law and tie the hands of future administrations, I'm guessing you're not a fan of that.
Not a fan of that at all, no. I mean, heavens alive. Look where that could end if it got expanded.
Christine, thanks very
much. It's not going to be a Tory government forever and a day. It's going to come crashing to a halt probably fairly soon.
Christine Hamilton, for now, thanks very much indeed. It's time for our debate this hour. A new study has shown that many academy schools don't offer religious education. The data shows that nearly 500 secondary schools have zero hours of RE lessons in Year 11, and about a third of academies do not teach the subject. Worthing West MP, Sir Peter Bottomley, father of the House, of course, said the neglect of RE leaves, quote, a gaping hole in our school curriculum. We're asking, is religious education in schools important? Does it deserve that space in the school curriculum? We're joined by Dr Gavin Ashenden, former Honorary Chaplain to the Queen, and Stephen Evans, the Chief Executive of the National Secular Society. Stephen Evans, we'll begin with you, if I may. I suppose some schools will say, it's a very crowded curriculum. We're trying to cram a lot of information into young minds. Something's got to give.
Well, indeed. I think the thrust of the report that's been published seems to be suggesting that the government should tell Ofsted, compel schools to comply with the law on RE teaching. But what I think is really needed is reform of the law around RE and not some kind of strong-arm tactics to force schools to comply with what is very much an outdated and quite an unpopular law around RE. There's been a slew of reports over recent years that's been recommending reform of RE. It's underfunded, it's unpopular. I think it's lacking in a clear purpose as well. So I think we need to look at RE. I think there's something important in RE, but it's probably not best delivered through a subject called religious education.
Gavin Ashenden, what do you say to those parents who say, look, if religion is going to play a role in my children's life, it needs to come from the family, not the school?
Yes, actually, to my great surprise, I agree with quite a lot of what Steve said. The legislation isn't particularly good. There's always room for an improvement of it. But as to your question, that it should be privatised in the family, well, to some extent, of course, that's true. That happens. There is a primary responsibility in the family. But the problem is the family are always going to come from a particular cultural perspective. And what you need is the state to help provide a proper education that gives a much wider perspective. The whole of our society is based upon religious roots and development in history. And to everyone's surprise, I think, far from religion dying out, which is what the secularists in the 20th century thought, there's been a huge resurgence. You simply can't understand geopolitics unless you have a firm grasp of Christianity, Judaism and Islam, for example, and also secularism. I think part of the problem is that the way we use the word religion, we're really talking about worldviews and philosophies. So I have no objection to tidying up the way in which the law understands the way we educate people. But it's absolutely essential that the state should provide a proper diet and a proper education.
Stephen Evans, Gavin makes the point there that you can't really understand, you need to demystify other religions if you're to have social cohesion. We sort of get that argument. There's another argument which I want to introduce, that you can't understand your own history if you don't understand the fact that this country was deeply Christian for 1,600 years. I remember recently being surprised that a nephew of mine was watching a film and the Lord's Prayer was said, and it seemed to be new to him. And I thought, well, how can you really understand this country without a working knowledge of its religious heritage? You don't need to be able to quote the Bible chapter and verse, but you need to know bits of it.
Well, of course, religion will naturally come up in subjects such as history, but I also agree that there's a real value in teaching children about religion and belief diversity, the diversity that exists in the UK, but also that exists more broadly around the world. I think you do need a degree of knowledge of religion and belief literacy to understand the world around you and the people that you're living side by side with. But what I think is actually more important is that we give children an understanding of the importance of freedom of religion and belief, the idea that people will hold different beliefs and we respect their right to hold those beliefs, we respect their right to express those beliefs, and we respect their right to manifest those beliefs insofar as they're not causing harm to society or to anyone else. So I think what we really need is a revitalised civics and citizenship sort of education that teaches children about religious diversity, but other things like political literacy, the democratic process, fundamental British values, the rule of law, justice, and just respect and tolerance of other people's faith and beliefs. I think that's a more important thing for encouraging social cohesion and understanding of each other. I think that's more important than a deep theological understanding of religion, which was Ari's original purpose, but that purpose is gone now. I think it's the subject in search of a purpose. I think we need citizenship rather than Ari.
OK. That's an interesting point. Stephen Gavin, we have to leave it there. I'm afraid we're out of time, but appreciate your time today. Thank you very much indeed. Christine Hamilton alongside me. Elon Musk, we know who Elon Musk is. His employees, he says, we don't encourage them for their kids to study foreign languages because soon we'll have AI that will do it for them. The world, my point is, the world is changing. RE belongs to an old world. Kids can only absorb so much stuff. Let them do computer coding or something, or more maths.
Well, let's put Elon Musk to one side, shall we? I mean, we are fundamentally a Christian country. A lot of people, maybe the majority, are atheist or agnostic, but fundamentally we are a Christian country. And it is what actually underpins, people don't realise it, but it underpins much of the richness of our life. One of your contributors mentioned, you know, if you go back in our history, our architecture, our art, everything like that, if you don't understand any of that, I think you miss a huge amount of what is important about being British. And British values and our values collectively, they are Christian values. You would say you were horrified that your nephew had never heard of the Lord's Prayer. Was it the Lord's Prayer or the Ten Commandments? Yeah. It's the Lord's Prayer and the Ten Commandments between them. I mean, you know, put those together, and that is what we should all, in fact, strive to follow. You might not put it like that. And then, I mean, take the Bible. I mean, the King James Version is an amazing work of literature. I'm not talking about the sort of Disney-fied version of
so many of the sayings in everyday life come from it.
Sorry?
So many of the sayings.
Of course they do, yeah. So, I mean, I think it's incredibly important. And, yes, teach other religions, of course. But, you know, we are a Christian country, so the children here should be taught. The Queen is the supreme head, or the Supreme Governor, I'm not sure what she's called, of the Church of England. So teach that first.
Supreme Governor.
Supreme Governor. Christine. I knew you'd know.
Christine, thanks very much indeed. Time for 5 to 5, discussing 5 things that you might want to muse on before 5 o'clock. At 5, the US President Joe Biden is to send a group of American politicians to attend Brexit talks between the UK and Brussels. A White House spokesperson has called for Boris Johnson to find a solution to the trade deal after the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss announced plans to scrap parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Yanks getting involved. Christine Hamilton's furious.
Well, how dare he?
Hang on.
It's like Obama on the back of the Q stuff.
The parents of a teenage girl who died following an allergic reaction to a pret-a-manger baguette have set up a clinical trial to treat food allergies. Nadim and Tanya, Edna and Laperouse's daughter, Natasha, was 15 when she died in 2016. The treatment trial will investigate if everyday food products can be used to reduce the severity of allergic reactions. At 3, the outcome of the so-called Wagatha Christie trial between Rebecca Vardy and Colleen Rooney has gone to extra time after being delayed by 24 hours. Their lawyers preparing their closing speeches. The judge will give his verdict tomorrow on who will win the multi-million-pound libel case. At 2, forget traditional cash, chip and pin, and now even contactless swipes. MasterCard rolling out a controversial programme that will allow shoppers to pay at the till with a smile or a wave. There's a smile or a wave of the hand. The payment company will launch a biometric checkout programme it claims will speed up payments, cut queues, and provide more security than a standard credit or debit card. And estimated 100,000 Rangers football fans have travelled to Seville for tonight's Europa League final. Glasgow Rangers taking on Germany's Eintracht Frankfurt. It's their first European final in 14 years. It has been 33 degrees today in Seville. The bars will have been popular. We are trying to source a piper for you in Seville who can take us off air live close to 6.
We arrived last night and you could hear the atmosphere we were a few miles away from the town centre, and you could hear the fans, so what tonight's going to be like is be amazing, you know.
The only Scottish team to win 2 European trophies, hopefully.
tonight?
Unfortunately, I don't have a ticket for the game, but I'll enjoy it all the same. Looking forward to it.
100,000 there, only 9,000 or so tickets. A lot of them are going to be watching in the bars if they can find one, or other stadia which have been opened in Seville for them to gather in. For now, those are the 5 things you might want to know before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Well, let's have a ponder on those stories with my guest today, Christine Hamilton. Christine, what caught your ear?
Well, sorry I exploded earlier, but I mean, how dare Joe Biden interfere? I know he regards himself as Irish before he's American. They're proud of that now, seeing what a disaster he is. But you remember Obama, who said that if we voted Brexit, it would be back of the queue? I mean, it is absolutely nothing...
Well, we still haven't got a trade deal, have we?
We'll get one. It is nothing to do with them. I mean, I find it staggering that he's got... I mean, look at him now, lolloping across that thing. I mean, honestly... if that's the best that the Democrats could find. Pret-a-manger, the nut allergy, I mean, good for those parents turning an absolute unbelievable tragedy of their daughter. I think there have been several examples recently about people who have turned a tragedy in their family to the benefit of others, and it's good for them to do it, but also it obviously benefits everybody else. You know, when I was young, nobody had a peanut allergy. I don't understand where these things
we don't have an answer to it yet, do we? Why allergies have just become an epidemic. Just on the cashless thing, do you worry that we're doing away with cash? Did the pandemic not teach us anything about the fragility of supply chains and physically needing to hold things?
Oh, I think it would be... You can't do away with cash. A lot of people depend on it for all sorts of things. That would be awful. Although, on the other hand, I do find it very easy just to flash your card or smile at your phone and it opens up and tells you what you want to know. It's much easier. But no, I think it would be horrendously bad. And we're heading that way, probably. But I'm old-fashioned enough to think that would be wrong, and certainly wrong for a lot of older people who can't cope with all this.
Do you think they feel pretty voiceless? I recently tried to get some euros from my high street bank because one of the kids was off to Normandy. Forget it, they said.
I was going to say, good luck.
Well, I mean, you know, crazy. Couldn't get it. High street banks are becoming a thing of the past, aren't they? If you're a bank, you want to do it all online, it's nice and cheap, you don't need to employ any of those pesky, expensive staff.
Our local town, is not a single bank in the town at all. Amazing. It's a reasonably sized town.
Yeah.
None.
Christine, for now, thanks very much indeed. We are still trying to source a piper in Seville. If we find one, we'll bring it to you before...
God help with Spanish. Dear,
the hour
dear.
is out. 100,000 Glasgow Rangers fans are in Seville. It's been 33 degrees today. What could possibly go wrong? Here's a break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Coming up this hour, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has been facing questions from MPs today on her plans to change where Britain's foreign aid is sent and spent. The proposals will see the government scrap the £13 million it gives to China every year for research. I'll be joined by foreign aid advocate, the former head of the British Army, General Lord Richard Dannett. Inflation has reached its highest level in 40 years, 9%. This afternoon, Boris Johnson promised to look at measures needed to help people struggling with rising bills. Our economics editor, Liam Halligan, will bring us the latest on that. And tens of thousands of Glasgow Rangers fans are in Seville ahead of one of the biggest matches in the club's history. We'll cross live and speak to fans, some of whom have travelled by coach. And apparently the Loos had stopped working by Newcastle. With me through the course of the next 2 hours to have her say, the writer Christine Hamilton, who'll be reflecting on those stories with you and me. But first, we have the latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Colin, thank you. It's just after 5 o'clock. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Labour has repeated its call for a windfall tax on energy companies to help tackle the rising cost of living on the day inflation hit a 40-year high. The Consumer Price Index rose to 9% in the year to April, up from 7% in March. During Prime Minister's questions, Boris Johnson promised to look at all measures available to help struggling families. But Sir Keir Starmer accused the government of inaction.
Whilst he dithers, British households are slapped with an extra £53 million on their energy bills every single day. Meanwhile, every single day, North Sea oil and gas giants rake in £32 million in unexpected profit.
We're already spending £22 billion. We're already helping people with the cost of living in any way that we can, Mr. Speaker. But the reason we can do that is because we took the tough decisions to get this country through COVID, to make sure that we came out of lockdown in the way that was necessary, and to have a strong economy.
Well, official figures show food prices are also going up across the UK. According to the Retail Price Index figures, overall prices rose by nearly 7%, with lamb and poultry up by 14% and 10% respectively. Some producers, like Premier Foods, which owns brands including Mr Kipling and Oxo, have warned that prices may still go up even further. Boris Johnson says he was shocked to learn that a Conservative MP had been arrested, having been accused of rape and sexual assault offences. The politician, who can't be named for legal reasons, has been released on bail pending further investigations, and he's been asked by the Chief Whip to stay away from Parliament. Meanwhile, Tory MP Michael Fabricant has apologised after he was accused of treating the arrest as a laughing matter by posting an inappropriate tweet.
A lot of people chose to take offence. I mean, as I said just now, I mean, the events are disgusting, and how can anyone make light of rape or sexual assault or any other similar event? But what I was making light of was that there'd been a huge amount of speculation over the last 24 hours about who this person might be. Oh, with hindsight, yeah, I shouldn't have done it. But you know what? One of the things I like to do when I do my tweets is mix in serious politics with a little bit of humour.
An NHS trust has been fined more than £1.3 million after failing to provide safe care to a pensioner and a dialysis patient. A senior district judge said that families of the deceased had suffered unimaginable grief after the patients died whilst at the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital in 2019 and 2020. The judge said the offences were aggravated by a previous fine and a poor management, health and safety record. A 13-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of sharing Islamist terrorist material online. The teenager, who was arrested in London, has been released on bail until mid-June. Investigators say whilst it's very rare for teenagers to be arrested for a terrorism offence, there's been a worrying increase in the number of young people drawn into terrorism. The Home Secretary says work is taking place right now to send migrants to Rwanda after more than 900 migrants crossed the Channel in 4 days. More than 260 small boats have crossed the English Channel into UK waters so far this year, GB News can confirm. 7 were spotted on the English side of the Channel yesterday, and 285 people were transferred onto border force and rescue vessels. Spanish police have arrested 5 Eintracht Frankfurt fans following clashes in Seville city centre ahead of the Europa League final against Scotland's Rangers. Footage shows the men wearing balaclavas and throwing flares in the direction of outdoor bars where Rangers fans were gathered. Spanish authorities have deployed thousands of officers to police the game across the city. Kick-off is at 7 o'clock tonight. This is GB News. That's all from me for now. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Colin.
Going to talk about foreign aid in just a second. Thanks for joining us. It's 5:05, by the way. Kristen Hamilton's my guest today. I'm going to get something off my chest straight away. I can't wait.
Right.
We just read there in the bulletin, Scotland's Rangers. Imagine us saying England's Arsenal. You can see why the jocks get annoyed, can't you?
You wouldn't, would you?
No, exactly. That's it. I've done it. I've got it off my chest.
Well, I don't mind who would. I support Wales first, England second, Scotland third, and whoever's fighting the French. And that does, So I suppose Rangers I'm supporting.
That's cleared that up. Thanks very much. Let's get underway then. So the UK is to stop sending £13 million of taxpayers' cash to China every year so that Beijing can pay for research. It's part of a wider shake-up of the way the government distributes foreign aid, which will now be tied much more to our trading relationships with countries. More of the £12 billion budget will now be spent on securing economic partnerships with other countries. While some have been critical of the strategy, terming it aid for trade, the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, said it would help raise incomes across the globe and lift countries out of poverty. Answering questions to the International Development Committee, she explained why the government had made the decision to reform overseas aid.
What we recognise is there is increasing activity by authoritarian states, particularly in terms of investment in countries, trade with countries, and economic coercion, as well as security interference as well. So our development strategy is about creating a strong alternative offer that is honest and reliable and that helps those countries develop in the direction that is going to lead to a sustainable future rather than a direction of unsustainable debt and increasingly authoritarian policies which would lead to huge problems in the population. And we can see the adverse effects, for example, of the Wagner Group's activities in certain African countries, of the heavy levels of indebtedness some countries have to China, to see what are the perils of going down that route.
Well, let's turn to General Lord Richard Dannett, who's the former head of the British Army, of course, and at times an advocate for foreign aid. Lord Dannett, appreciate your time joining us from Westminster, as we see. In my introduction, I talked about the fact that some people were critical of the idea of aid for trade. What's wrong with aid for trade?
I don't think there's anything wrong in principle with aid for trade, but let me just say front up, given your introduction, I very much regret the reduction that the government made a while ago to reduce our spending on foreign aid in the round from 0.7 of GDP to 0.5 of GDP. I think it's a huge mistake. I think one of the ways that the UK has achieved influence, beneficial influence in the world over the years, is through a harmonisation of our diplomacy, our defence and our focused application of development money. And I think it's a shame that we have cut several £billion out. That said, what the Foreign Secretary is saying is reasonable, but within the context of that wider point I've just made, I think it's a shame that we've cut our overseas aid budget quite considerably.
Do you think it's wishful thinking sometimes that we think we're buying influence with aid, but actually we're not? I mean, I'm thinking specifically, for instance, the pictures that we saw back in late February. Imran Khan, who at the time was still Prime Minister of Pakistan, glad-handing one Vladimir Putin, about 2 days after the invasion began, signing a big new wheat deal between Pakistan and Russia. We give Pakistan £250 million a year in foreign aid so that they can cosy up to our enemies.
Well, influence is a byproduct. It's a beneficial byproduct. What is the main product is actually the benefits to the countries to which our aid goes, what they can do with that money. And this comes back to the Foreign Secretary's principal point, that we can focus some of the money to maximise UK trade with those countries. That is beneficial for our country, of course. It's beneficial for those countries. And as the byproduct, it does also increase influence. Yes, of course, Imran Khan glad-handing Vladimir Putin is an ugly scene. But we could all pick selective incidents to show how it's not working.
Yeah. I mean, part of the problem surely right now is that we have a cost of living crisis. We've got tremendous pressure on spending, on budgets. We were mentioning Vladimir Putin. You know far better than most people how there is a deep and pressing urgency right now to increase spending on defence. Some people say up to 4% of GDP. Something's got to give. And in the minds of some people, that's not going to be the education budget or the National Health Service or defence. And we're looking still, as you say, from 0.7 to 0.5%. That is still £12 billion a year, and that still makes us the third biggest donor in the world behind the US and Germany.
Yes, we'll put it in the widest context. If the UK wants to play a major role on the world stage, then actually its development budget is a key part of that. But you can probably see in the shot behind me, Houses of Parliament. I'm about to go back in there and speak in a debate on defence. I'm going to be making the case for an increase in our defence spending. When you put our defence spending, when you put our overseas aid spending against the context of our social security spending, our health spending, our education spending, those elements spent on defence and development are really actually quite small. But what this country can do on the world stage is considerably above the few extra billion that we're actually arguing for and talking about. It is well worth doing in the wider context, and it plays into the wider argument about increasing British trade, which is good for the partners that we trade with. It's actually good for this country as well.
Lord Dannett, that was a very elegant way of saying you've got to leave to go and join that debate. So we appreciate your time and we'll let you go. Thanks ever so much.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Christine Hamilton's alongside me to ponder on this one. Christine, foreign aid, Lord Dannett's not some lily-livered NGO boss. He's somebody who knows the way the world works. And he says, actually, yes, defence buys you respect. So does foreign aid.
Yeah, well, he's somebody to be greatly respected, whatever he's talking about, and I understand that point of view. I just think we should make sure that it is targeted better and we control it better. We don't just fling money at these countries. Well, we actually don't know who's getting it, whether it's actually filtering down to the people that we think it's filtering down to. So, and I'm all in favour of humanitarian aid, so when there's a specific problem, then yes. But as I said earlier, the British are amongst the most generous in the world, so I'm not in favour of cutting off overseas aid altogether, but we've got to get, famous old phrase, get a grip on it so that it's properly spent and targeted and we have control over where it's spent at the far end.
Well, money matters very much a pressing subject right now because UK inflation has hit a 40-year high at 9%. The figures just released account for the 12 months to April this year. They show the impact of higher energy bills hitting millions of households. Inflation, it's up from 7% in March, so 7 to 9% in not very long. It's not clear where the ceiling for these rises is. Some analysts predicting it will rise irresistibly throughout the course of the rest of the year, and we know not where, or do we? Liam Halligan, our economics editor's here in the studio. Where does it stop, Liam? Where does it stop, really?
Well, if you drill down into the numbers, you're right. The headline number, Colin, is 9%. That's the consumer price index. In old money, the retail price index, the number that the Bank of England used to target before the Office for National Statistics said it's no longer a real statistic. That's 11.1%. But if you drill down further, which is the sort of thing that I like doing, I should get out more, I know. It's just a thing. So you look at what's called the PPI, the Producer Price Index. That is the cost of the inputs that factories and hospitality companies have to buy before they sell us stuff and services. So it's materials, raw materials, labour, cost of heating and so on. That producer price index, Colin, in the 12 months to April, 18.6%. Okay. And when your producer price index is double your consumer price index, you know those costs are going to have to be passed on or the firms go bust. Now, I'm a nice guy, as you know. It doesn't give me any pleasure to say this, but I think we're going to see headline consumer price inflation in the mid-teens.
Wow. And when do those... there's a question about how much the numbers matter in the real world. I mean, clearly they set the weather a little bit, don't they? But do they also feed through pretty quickly? I mean, does it go through in a month or a year? When does the sort of reset happen?
Well, the CPI is the evidence that's in the shops now and on the internet now. So that's already been pushed through. The producer price index, which I just outlined, probably for the first time on national television ever, are cost pressures in the supply chain that may or may not be passed on, but on balance, most of them will be passed on, or the firms concerned will really have their margin squeezed, or they will go bust. What I would say to you is this, and I've said it many times on GB News before, at a time when inflation is being driven largely by food and fuel prices, not just linked to the war in Ukraine, though of course that's made them worse, but they were elevated anyway. We know that food and fuel is disproportionately bought by poorer people. It's just common sense. They spend more of their disposable income. I think if you said to a lot of hard-pressed families watching this on television, listening to GB News on the radio, and you told them that their cost of living has gone up by 9, 10 or 11% in the last 12 months, that's a sick joke. For them, it's gone up 20, 30, 40%. And that's the issue.
I always, just before I come on earlier, I check the Press Association to see what they're reporting. And they've just reported about 3:45 that petrol, not diesel, petrol has just hit a record high. And these things that, would have been front-page news not very long ago, you're getting them every day.
And that's what happens. We'll remember it as a lad, and I'm sure Christine would concur. When we were lads in the 70s and 80s, Colin, it was a high inflation environment. So then people would take their chances, producers would take their chances and push up prices even when their own costs weren't going up. We see this, in my view, they would deny it, with a lot of the broadband providers now pushing up their services by RPI, the higher rate of consumer inflation, plus 3 or 4%. We see it also, I think, again, they would deny it, with the big oil and gas companies when they sell us petrol on the forecourts. They're not passing on that 5% fuel reduction that Rishi Sunak gave us at the last spring statement. Again, they would deny it. In my view, the big oil and gas companies, I think they've accepted they're going to get clobbered by windfall tax. They're getting a bit more in while they can. Again, they would deny it. That's my professional opinion.
Surely the government should cut the tax on petrol and diesel. I mean, at the moment, half of your...
It's about 55%.
I thought it was 53, but I absolutely...
But he took the 5p off.
But they haven't passed it on.
Wow, thank you. It hasn't been passed on.
And then the prices get ratcheted. We like Colin. The prices get ratcheted up when the oil price goes up, but they don't come down when the oil price comes down. You can plot graphs to illustrate that. I'm not going to use the word prove, illustrate, because, again, these big companies are watching and they would deny.
Christine, it's generational, isn't it? I mean, as Liam points out, there was that time in the 70s, inflation was a scourge, people were used to it, it penalised pensioners, and then we had 30 years of just not worrying about it.
Younger people don't even know what it is. They're about to find out. But, I mean, I clearly remember. I wish I had been a lad in the 70s. I was a girl in the 50s, almost. But, yes, and there's a huge time lag on all this. I mean, when all this quantitative easing was going on, we're back to the Governor of the Bank of England being asleep at the wheel. When he was madly down there in the basement printing out money, we are now feeling the whammy on all that. And all these people who were, encouraged to stay at home on furlough, paid to do nothing, it's all coming home to roost, and it's going to get a lot worse.
We've got to leave it there.
There's no
Liam.
way it can't.
We've got to leave it there. Liam, thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it. And Christine, thanks. Now, a Conservative MP has been released on bail after being arrested in connection with alleged rape and sexual assault offences dating back more than 15 years. The Metropolitan Police confirming the suspect is a man, and the Chief Whip of the Conservative Party has asked him not to attend Parliament while the investigation is still happening. The Speaker of the Commons has urged MPs not to identify him publicly. Let's go to Westminster. Our political correspondent Tom Harwood is there. Hi to you, Tom. The Speaker obviously conscious that a fellow MP could use parliamentary privilege to identify this individual. What do you make of the story?
Well, it's a pretty significant intervention from the Speaker of the House of Commons because, of course, it was only in 2016 that the rules were actually changed. Before February 2016, if a Member of Parliament was arrested for a situation like the one we have now seen, they would be automatically named. However, the rules were changed and Parliament voted for those changed rules by quite a substantial majority in February 2016, and now it is the done thing that those names are not presented. Now, it has to be said that's not the case that you would be seeing from, for example, a teacher or indeed someone else in a position of authority, perhaps a medic. But for MPs, they have this veil of secrecy. Now, some people agree with that, some people disagree with that, but certainly what the Speaker has said today in terms of keeping with that rule change, that rule of the House of Commons that those names aren't announced, it also speaks to the fact that the name is, quite frankly, an open secret in Westminster, that many people walking about in the corridors of power have been saying this name for some time. Obviously, we are not going to say that name now for legal reasons, but it is a name that is relatively well known in the corridors of power.
Harwood there. Coming up, nearly half of all new nurses and midwives registered to work in the UK in the past year have come from abroad. We'll be discussing why the UK is not training more nurses domestically. First, let's have a look at the weather for you.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a fine day for most of us, but showers and thunderstorms are lurking nearby, and overnight there is the risk of intense rain in places. A couple of things going on overnight. Weather front is approaching from the west. That will bring some rain in to northern and western parts of the country, but ahead of it, a plume of very warm air and humidity arriving from the south will extend showers into southwest England, Wales during the evening, and then some intense thunderstorms heading into the south coast and the southeast overnight. Now, with those showers and thunderstorms, we're likely to see frequent flashes of lightning, hail and gusty winds. With the rain in the north and west, also we'll see some heavy downpours at times. But all of this is out of the way by the end of the night. Clear spells follow, with temperatures holding up in the double figures in most spots. 1 or 2 showers in the far southeast first thing, they clear away. Further showers arriving into western Scotland and Northern Ireland through the day. But otherwise, away from any showers, sunny spells quite widely, I think, by the afternoon across much of the country. Not quite as warm as it has been, but still temperatures into the high teens and low 20s for the vast majority. 20 degrees in Glasgow, 23 for London. Now, through Thursday evening, further showers will affect northern and western Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the showery activity towards the northwest will eventually make inroads across many other parts of the country by Friday. There's also the threat during Friday that we'll see some showers or thunderstorms emerge from the southeast. But as we start off Friday, temperatures mostly 11 to 13 degrees. A lot of cloud cover, I think, and the potential for some rain across southern parts and central parts of the UK during the morning, and that threat of thunderstorms close to the southeast by lunchtime. But Friday's a showery day. Saturday looks more settled for most.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up on The Mark Steyn Show, as Australian Prime Minister ScoMo joins the Western leaders who tackle Children Club, Alexandra Marshall will be taking him down after his public diss of her latest article. Well, one thing that isn't being tackled is the cost of living crisis. Jamie Jenkins will be looking at that, as well as Spain's draconian travel rules. Plus, Baroness Hoey will be on hand to discuss the proposed changes or even a total revocation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. All that and more on The Mark Steyn Show at 8 o'clock.
Now, nearly half of all new nurses and midwives registered to work in the UK in the past year have come from abroad. The total, more than 23,000, is a record high, and comes as Britain struggles to increase the number of homegrown nurses. Nearly all the foreign recruits were trained in non-European countries, with most coming from India and the Philippines. It's claimed that that's reduced the quality of care in those countries, of course. Well, the Nursing and Midwifery Council data also shows the numbers leaving the profession, not about entering the profession, but leaving the profession, that's also rising. Mainly, they say, because of retirement or what they describe as burnout, exhaustion, presumably. Professor Jane Perry is the Dean of Health, Sport and Bioscience at the University of East London. Welcome to you. I mean, just on that point that I mentioned there about there being a brain drain from countries like the Philippines, like India. These are highly motivated, educated at some expense, people who could be real future leaders in those countries, and instead, for reasons that are very obvious, that they elect to come here, depriving their home countries of their expertise.
I agree. I think it's not a great solution, is it? And, much as we welcome international nurses, there is that balance because they are depleting their own country of an essential workforce. And really what we probably need to be looking for is actually growing our own local sustainable workforces in our areas. And that's a key priority for every university up and down the country at the moment. And there's some great examples of how we're trying to do that. So there's a big balance in there. We need to get that right.
I mean, Jane, look, you're at a university. You're hardly likely to agree with me or any of our viewers and listeners who say, well, the problem here is that now our young nurses go to university, they accrue those massive debts. Back in the day, it wasn't seen as a profession as it's become, and actually they sort of learned a bit more on the job, but they didn't have these gigantic debts.
Well, I mean, you're talking to a nurse here who trained a long time ago when nurses trained very differently. But I think there was a lot of value in being having a degree nursing career. That really is very important. And I think one of the things that is important to note about nursing now is that, yes, there's undergraduate and you do have to pay to do your course, but also there's new apprenticeship routes now. So when you're talking about growing local sustainable workforces, that is actually about offering apprenticeships where students don't actually have to pay. They work with their employers. And that is another good solution to support students.
Do you worry, I mean, again, you've obviously spent a lot of time thinking and talking about this, but do you worry, is there an element in which perhaps nursing is seen by some young men and women now as something that is almost as, it's a difficult job, it's a hard job, there's lots of, difficult encounters with the general public in varying states of ill health. It's almost seen as the sort of job that can be the drudgery can be contracted out to foreign nationals.
Well, I'm a nurse of 40 years, so I am going to say that nursing has been the most incredibly rewarding and satisfying career of my life, and I've had a fantastic career in so many different ways from being a nurse. But no, I don't believe that. I believe that actually, particularly where I am in the University of East London, we have a real wonderful East London community of students that actually haven't had some of the opportunities to undertake a role in in nursing, and they really love training and working and being part of the local community and actually representing what East London is. So I think there are also there are plenty of people who do want this as a career, see it as a fulfilling career. My colleagues up and down the country, we are all very passionate about being nurses, and we still very, very much believe that, as we've seen during COVID and all sorts of other times, this is such an important role. And it's not.
Yeah, Professor Perry, we really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. It's an important debate. Thanks a lot. Christine Hamilton is alongside me. Of course, that's all true. My mum was a nurse. We appreciate the work the nurses do. Our young people don't want to be nurses. I mean, that seems to be the conclusion. I mean, in the numbers required.
Or possibly we collectively haven't done enough to attract them and recruit them and train them. Maybe we haven't made it attractive enough. Goodness knows who wants to do it. I mean, they have my absolute admiration. Dealing with bodies the whole time must be horrendous. I'm about to go in and have a knee operation shortly, so I've got to be really nice about it, just in case any of the people who are looking after me are listening. But it's also grossly immoral, actually, what we're doing to these other countries. We are taking the brightest and best to come and work for us, as it were. So people have always thought that just throwing money at the health service, that's all you need to do. Just throw another few million, just throw this, that and the other. But it's got to be targeted, perhaps a little less money spent in all the layers of administration and bureaucracy. I mean, bring back matron. Things were rather different when we had matron there running the hospital, and it was a darn sight cheaper, the operation of running the hospital. I know it's all very technical now. But I think we've got to adjust our priorities so that we do attract them. You don't need a university degree to become a brilliant, wonderful nurse. You simply don't.
The part of this story that I think is increasingly coming into view, and it's not just a shortage of nurses, it can be a shortage of tanker drivers, teachers. There's a cohort coming through that's missing. There's a demographic bulge that's missing. We're just beginning to see the impact of empty cradles, which we've seen in other countries before, as like Japan. I think that's part of what's going on here.
I'm sure that the last couple of years, all that COVID nightmare will have put a lot of people off nursing. I mean, that they've seen
or
what
attracted them to it.
Yeah.
Christine, here we go. We're going to go to Seville. We've been promising you this for a while. We're going to go to the location of the Europa Cup final. Glasgow fans are enjoying the balmy temperatures there, queuing to get into the ground where the match starts in an hour and a half. 100,000, 8 p.m, forgive me, 8 p.m. 100,000 Glaswegians, the majority of them without tickets, about 90,000 of them, we think, without tickets, have made the trip by hook or by crook, by coaches, 16 chartered flights from Glasgow Airport. Others have taken incredibly circuitous routes, going 3 and 4 airports to arrive in Seville eventually. One Glasgow Rangers fan travelling from Sydney to make this fixture. They've not played in a European final since, I think it's 2008. They're taking on Frankfurt tonight. And if you are listening on radio, well, I've been told to describe it to you. Imagine thousands of Glaswegians who haven't seen much sun in some time now bearing their legs in the Iberian Peninsula. Does that do it? OK. Live pictures from Seville, much more on that story.
Good luck to Rangers.
Amen to that. Coming up, we're going to debate the big topic of the day. We're asking, should government spending increase to cover the cost of living crisis? First, the latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Colin, thank you. It's 5:33. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Labour has repeated its call for a windfall tax on energy companies to help tackle the rising cost of living on the day inflation hit a 40-year high. The consumer price index rose to 9% in the year to April, up from 7% in March. During Prime Minister's questions, Boris Johnson promised to look at all measures available to help struggling families. But Sir Keir Starmer accused the government of inaction. The Prime Minister says he was shocked to learn that a Conservative MP had been arrested having been accused of rape and sexual assault offences. The politician, who can't be named for legal reasons, has been released on bail pending further investigations, and he's been asked by the Chief Whip to stay away from Parliament. The Home Secretary says she's pushing ahead with controversial plans to send migrants to Rwanda. More than 900 people crossed the channel in the past 4 days, bringing the total number to almost 8,700 since the start of the year. And Spanish police have arrested 5 Eintracht Frankfurt fans following clashes in Seville ahead of tonight's Europa League final against Rangers. Footage shows the men wearing balaclavas and throwing flares in the direction of outdoor bars where Rangers fans were gathered. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Colin will be back in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.238 to the dollar and 1.181 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,470.59 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Top stories just after 5:30, well after 5:30 this afternoon. Boris Johnson says he'll look at all the measures needed to help people struggling with rising bills. The UK's rate of inflation has reached a 40-year high today, 9%. At PMQs, the leader of the opposition called for a one-off tax on oil and gas profits, arguing it would raise billions to help with energy bills. The Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, says the Conservative MP accused of rape has agreed to stay away from Westminster. Last night, the Met Police said the man, aged in his 50s, had been held on suspicion of indecent assault, sexual assault, rape, abuse of position of trust and misconduct in public office. He's now been released on bail. And tens of thousands of Rangers fans are in Seville ahead of one of the biggest matches in the club's history. Glasgow Rangers taking on the German side, Eintracht Frankfurt, in the Europa League final, Europa Cup final this evening. 100,000 of them are in the city. Our debate then this hour. Rishi Sunak is reportedly planning to cut taxes and increase the warm home discount by hundreds of pounds to tackle the cost of living crisis. The poorest British households are currently set to receive £150. That's from October to help pay their energy bills. Treasury officials are reportedly planning a one-off increase of £300, £500 or possibly even £600 to combat rising energy prices. We're asking, is that the right approach, or should the government be spending even more taxpayers' cash or cutting back spending elsewhere to help the poorest cope with the cost of living crisis? We're joined by research fellow at the Bow Group, Benjamin Loughnane, and former Labour Party advisor, Scarlett Maguire. Welcome to you both. Scarlett, if we can begin with you. I mean, interesting front page story in the Times today. They seem to be pretty well informed that come the autumn, I'm guessing come an emergency budget, taxes will be cut.
I don't really understand how Rishi Sunak can both cut taxes in the autumn and put up national insurance, which is a tax and has already hit people now. It seems completely mad. And actually, what people really need is they need money now. I mean, the stories coming out. I was talking to an MP who has fuel bills being sent to him by people saying, can you ring up the company? This must be a mistake. He says most of the time it's not a mistake. That they've gone up by eye-watering amounts. So what we need action now, not promises later. We need a windfall tax, which even the head of BP said would make no difference to his investment. And we need the money going to the poorest people. My worry about a tax cut is, as you say, it doesn't hit the poorest. It doesn't hit people on benefits. It doesn't hit people on the very low incomes. Those are the people who are not managing now. It's not about when the winter comes. It's about now. That's what's frightening.
Benjamin Loughnane, a windfall tax, says Scarlett Maguire. What says you?
Well, I think that we need to be looking for, first of all, the short-term solutions are very important, but we need to be looking at the long-term solutions, which for years now we've had rampant public spending out of control. We have so much waste in the way that public money is being spent. We need to look at things like the foreign aid budget and say, is it really appropriate that when there are people who are starving in this country who can't even afford to heat their homes and feed their families, that we should be spending millions to countries like China to teach people how to grow rice, or millions or billions to countries like India, which have a space program, and yet we are funding their programs over there. We need to start saying, well, charity begins at home. We need to put our people first, for now at least, and look at a long-term solution to prevent this from happening again.
We'll just tackle that foreign aid point, because Scarlett, I know you take the view, we've talked about it before, that you can only do it once, can't you? You can only cut it once.
Is this me or foreign aid is a very, very small part of the budget, as we know, and actually the Conservatives have made it less. And what has happened is it's not that a lot of money goes to China and India. It is actually the cuts have meant that the health provision in Africa has fallen. And actually foreign aid is also about soft power. It is the least of our problems. What we need to do is we need to focus on what are we doing at home? It's not about waste. It's about what we're going to do at home to fix the poorest. As long as we have these ridiculous debates about waste here and waste there, we could save money. Actually, we're leaving the people who cannot pay their bills, who are literally choosing between heating and eating, and it's hitting children. That's what's so terrible. We're talking about school dinners at the moment, right? That is not right. We've got to do something. I mean, that's why we have governments, to protect the most vulnerable.
Benjamin Loughnane, Scarlett Maguire says this isn't about waste. It's about more fundamental priorities when it comes to spending.
Well, I don't think you can spend your way out of a recession any more than you can borrow your way out of debt. I think the best way to release the cost of living crisis for ordinary people is to reduce the amount of money that they are having to pay. So reducing their tax burden. And the best way to reduce their tax burden is to cut waste within public spending. So we need to trim the fat and look at areas where, and I'm not just talking about the foreign aid budgets, I'm talking about within the public sector throughout it. There is an enormous amount of waste, and we need to look at every single way that we can cut that money before we start saying we need to raise taxes on people, before we start saying we need to borrow more money, before we say we need to start investing in these huge spending schemes to give people money, which we don't have to give them, which we're taking from them anyway, which they're going to end up having to pay for through their tax burden. So we need to look at eliminating the waste that exists within public spending before we even start talking about tax or public funding schemes.
Benjamin Loughnane and Scarlett Maguire, there we have to leave it. Appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Christine Hamilton's alongside me to offer a view, I'm sure. Where would you cut? Where would you spend?
Picking up on what Benjamin has just said, absolutely cut the bloated public sector. I mean, if people can work most of the time from home anymore, I mean, what's his name, Jacob Rees-Mogg is onto them, isn't he? We need to have a thorough overhaul of the whole of the public sector. How many sort of diversity officers are there throughout the civil service? Do we need any more? How much money?
I'm not a great fan of diversity officers, but I'm not sure if you sacked all of them, you'd raise that much money.
No, I mean, OK, it's a small example, but we need to cut the public sector. And, of course, what we really need to do is get rid of net zero. We need to cut the energy taxes that people are having to pay, the green taxes that people are having to pay on their energy bills. And as somebody said earlier, that impacts much more heavily on the poorer people because a bigger percentage of their spending is on that sort of thing. So cut all this green tax. People don't understand, or they forget, of course everybody knows, but they forget that the government doesn't have any money. It's only got our money. So whatever it gives out in one direction has to come from us eventually, but it needs to be targeted. The people who need help now, as the lady just said, the people who need help now are those at the bottom of the economic heap. That's where the money should be directed.
Are you...
And I shouldn't think, sorry to interrupt, but I shouldn't think they're too worried about net zero when they can't pay the bill at the checkout.
Are you surprised at how little there seems to be from the Tory backbenches of that old Thatcherite spirit that said, actually, if you want to grow the cake, you cut taxes, and actually you'll get more tax revenue in as a consequence.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, what was it was 98p in the pound was the top rate of tax when Thatcher got in, I think, roughly speaking. Liam would know exactly. And she slashed it. And what happened? The total tax take went up. I mean, it's a well-known economic graph that, you know, the lower the tax, the more tax comes in.
The Laffer curve, the famous Laffer curve.
The Laffer curve, that's right. And she created this amazing enterprise economy which dragged the country up out of the doldrums of the 70s.
Christine?
We need a bit more of that.
For now, thanks very much. Now, Ukrainian refugees are being made homeless and, in many cases, even left destitute after relationships break down with their hosts in the UK. Refugees have been asked to leave their sponsors' homes with only one day's notice. They're then left with no option but to be referred to local authorities as homeless or attempt to find last-minute rented accommodation. That's if they can afford it. Community groups said such incidents were happening among well-meaning hosts who failed to anticipate the enormity of the commitment until refugees arrived on their doorsteps, adding to the stress and trauma for those newcomers. There are fears that the Homes for Ukraine scheme could ultimately break down completely. We're joined by Martin Holton, who's offered his home to eight Ukrainian refugees. Martin, thanks for joining us. And tell us how you arrived at that decision in just a second. But for some people, listening to what I just read out will remind them that sometimes the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Other people will hear what I said and say, well, yeah, sure, this was always going to happen. It's in a minority of cases. In many others, it's working.
For me, it's working. I have no problems with my families. I've got 3 sisters with 5 children. I may be very lucky that they are all, obviously, the 2 sisters and the other mother is a family friend since childhood, so they all know each other. But they're no problem to me whatsoever. They get on and do their own things. And one of them has a job. The others are looking for work and successfully will find work because they're out there actively looking at it every day. 2 of the children, the 4-year-olds are at school, the others start in September.
That's amazing, really, isn't it, that people can be integrated into a community that quickly?
Yeah, there's a lot of support. Where we are, Kenilworth, Warwickshire, there's a tremendous amount of support. There's probably, I should say, about 300 Ukrainians in the area. They all meet up locally. That's been organised by people locally as well. There's a Facebook group for them to ask questions when they're picking people up, bringing them back. How do they fill in the form? So everybody works together in this area. And I haven't heard of anybody, well, I haven't heard of anybody at all that's asked their families to leave or individuals to leave.
Yeah. I mean, when the numbers are so large, there's going to be a minority, isn't there? There's always going to be, because it was done at speed. The whole thing was done at such pace, wasn't it? The need was so great. Just in terms of the practicalities, Martin, did you have any say-so at all as to who moved into your home? I mean, it's a big deal, isn't it?
I opened the garage as a drop-in centre, and then I went and did a trip to Ukraine, which we blogged on Facebook. During that trip, I was rung by a local lady who said, it's a bit much, but I have, at the time it was 7, it's now 8, that need housing. And I said, yeah, fine. But until they arrived and I opened the door, no, in answer to your question, I didn't know who they were.
Yeah. And I'm going to put the question, I suspect we know the answer in advance, but no regrets?
Absolutely not, no. As I've said umpteen times, they have put an enhancement on my life that make me feel better for helping them. But I may be very lucky.
Well, you may be very lucky, but you're very generous as well, Martin Holton, and with your time, which you've been generous with for us. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Martin Holton.
Thank you very much.
Christine Hamilton's alongside me. Some people are terrific, aren't they?
I mean, that really was amazing. Good for him. He has also been amazing, but he has also been lucky with the people that he got, and it's a dip in the brand. I can't say it. In the brand tub for people, who they get and whether those people gel with them, whether it's going to work. But and as you say, it was all done in such haste. But I don't know how big a problem this is. It's only just been surfacing today. But I mean, I hope this isn't going to put people off who still are. Do you know, the bureaucracy that people have had to go through to take in a family is absolutely... We've all
well, there has to be some.
Stories.
I mean, you know, we just assume bureaucracy is a bad thing, but then when it goes wrong, people say, why weren't there checks?
Of course, because there are some people out there who will be taking in families for the wrong reason. Of course there have to be checks. But, I mean, people who've had to have smoke alarms put in their home, they've lived there perfectly happily with their own family and their own children, they don't worry about a smoke alarm, can't have a refugee unless they've got one. Things like that are just absurd.
Christine?
But that was really heartwarming.
You should have a smoke alarm.
No, I didn't say I didn't.
No, I know. No.
I haven't got enough.
We're moving on. Now, Spanish police are expecting 100,000 Rangers fans in Seville tonight for the Europa League football final against Eintracht Frankfurt of Germany. Some supporters from Glasgow travelling down by coach. International fans have also flown from as far afield as Australia for the match. I have to say, I was talking to a producer and friend of mine, Ryan Cumbernauld, who's here now in the studio, looking at these live pictures, Ryan, that we're getting in. And you told me yesterday that you'd made contact with friends of yours who'd heard that, the coach from Glasgow, the loo had broken down by Newcastle.
By Newcastle, yeah. So they got the bus from Glasgow at 7 a.m. yesterday morning. They got to Carlisle and they'd run out of alcohol by that time already, so they had to stop. And then by Newcastle, the toilet broke down.
We're just looking at live pictures. I don't know if we can show that sort of full frame, and apologies if you're listening on radio. It's just a high shot. There we go. High shot showing, apart from anything else, everybody's in shorts and short sleeve order, which is typical, as you know, Ryan, for a Saturday evening in December in Glasgow.
Yeah, well, typical.
But it's 33 degrees.
Well, I mean, the sunburn tomorrow is going to be horrendous for people. I'm sure they won't be thinking about it today, but 100,000 Glaswegians in the sun drinking. What could possibly go wrong later on tonight?
But and the cost of alcohol in Spain is so little. They'll be just in seventh heaven.
It'll probably still be too high in the bars. They'll probably just go to the shops and buy massive cases of beer instead.
But I mean, it's worth reflecting on this point as we look at these pictures. That it's a big public order test for the Spanish police. We can see their vehicles there. But there's a support for Rangers. I mean, fanatical is the word I'm going to use because it's cliche, but it's true, isn't it? Ryan?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you've got, obviously Premier League is the biggest league in the world in England, but Celtic and Rangers are elite clubs, and people forget that. They don't have the money that the Premier League has in England, and they still compete at European level. I mean, you're talking about Rangers who got to this European Cup final, and a Premier League team like West Ham failed at the semi-final stage. So actually, with the lack of money, a Scottish Premier League team has managed to do one better and get to the final.
What about Frankfurt? They beat Barcelona, they're unbeaten.
Beat West Ham. I was at the game, and they were very, very good, very technical team. But Rangers have put out the likes of Leipzig before this, who are a very good German team. They're currently fourth in the Bundesliga, spent 137 million in the January transfer window. So you've got a lot of teams like that. Rangers have got a good pedigree in this, and they're probably our favourites tonight going into it.
OK. Christine, you were just shaping...
No, well, I mean, I know absolutely the square root of nothing about football.
That's it, and that's where we end it.
And that's where we end it. But I mean, go for it. What I just wanted, one tiny thing. I saw an enormous number of Union Jack hats, so they're actually flying the flag for all of us. So behave!
Here's Michelle Dewberry. Michelle.
Hello, Colin. Inflation 9%. I mean, OK, granted, slightly lower than anticipated, but still, we know, don't we, it's going to get a whole lot worse. So I'm asking people, what do you want the government to do? And by the way, is there a line between when it stops being the government's responsibility and our own responsibility? And I want to talk about the BLM situation. We'll all know what that means by now. One of the core organisations is having a lot of scrutiny applied because tens of millions of pounds, which was supposed to be spent on fighting racism, seems to have instead been spent on mansions and family members. So I'll be asking, is the BLM way the right way when it comes to fighting racism? And weight loss. Get this, Colin. Last year, £100 million fund set up to help people lose weight, £30 million of it being spent. 220 people managed to lose 5% of their body weight. That, by my calculations, £136,000 per person. So I'm asking, is it the government's responsibility to pay for you to lose weight?
Good question. Michelle, thanks very much indeed. Michelle Jewellery coming up at 6 o'clock. Just a final word from Christine Hamilton, who I've been delighted to have as our guest this afternoon. Ryan's still here as well. I think you just got the gig, by the way, for a sports correspondent role, whether you like it or not. Christine, it's been a pleasure. Your thoughts on today's news agenda? What's caught your ear? What's the story that matters historically?
That's just what Michelle has just been talking about has really annoyed me. You know, the government certainly should not be spending all that money. People just eat less.
That was pithy. Thank you.
Well,
very
I'm
much
sorry,
indeed.
but it really annoys me.
And we'll see you again soon, I hope. Christine, thanks so much. If we've got those live pictures from Seville, we'll show them to you. If we haven't, don't worry. 100,000 Glaswegians are in Spain. Good luck to them. Michelle's next.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a fine day for most of us, but showers and thunderstorms are lurking nearby, and overnight there is the risk of intense rain in places. A couple of things going on overnight. Weather front is approaching from the west. That will bring some rain in to northern and western parts of the country, but ahead of it, a plume of very warm air and humidity arriving from the south will extend showers into southwest England, Wales during the evening, and then some intense thunderstorms heading into the south coast and the southeast overnight. Now, with those showers and thunderstorms, we're likely to see frequent flashes of lightning, hail and gusty winds. With the rain in the north and west, also we'll see some heavy downpours at times. But all of this is out of the way by the end of the night. Clear spells follow, with temperatures holding up in the double figures in most spots. 1 or 2 showers in the far southeast first thing, they clear away. Further showers arriving into western Scotland and Northern Ireland through the day. But otherwise, away from any showers, sunny spells quite widely, I think, by the afternoon across much of the country. Not quite as warm as it has been, but still temperatures into the high teens and low 20s for the vast majority. 20 degrees in Glasgow, 23 for London. Now, through Thursday evening, further showers will affect northern and western Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the showery activity towards the northwest will eventually make inroads across many other parts of the country by Friday. There's also the threat during Friday that we'll see some showers or thunderstorms emerge from the southeast. But as we start off Friday, temperatures mostly 11 to 13 degrees. A lot of cloud cover, I think, and the potential for some rain across southern parts and central parts of the UK during the morning, and that threat of thunderstorms close to the southeast by lunchtime. But Friday's a showery day. Saturday looks more settled for most.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV,